session. We're excited to be here with the school board and city council. Just a reminder that, and this is more for the audience, that this is the work session between the city council and the school. We will not be taking any comments from the public, but it's for each of you to discuss here, get the information back. And so I to make that clear. What we're going to do first is that Travis will go around and take roll call for the council. And then we will.
Can you guys hear?
Okay, and then school board will. So you want to do roll call for us?
Sure. Hadley. Here. Hill.
Here.
Lewis. Here. Jizzle. Here. Johnson. Here. Olson. Here. Zittergren. Here.
Okay.
Good, and we'll call to order the meeting of the school board. Note that all directors are present, with Director Lang being present by Zoom. And there's a motion to approve the agenda. So I make a motion for the agenda. I'll second that. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Motion carries.
Okay. And all of you introduce.
Okay, so with us tonight is Casey with Fulton and Maine, which present findings of the North Alley District Master Plan as a result of the stakeholder meetings, public participation. And tonight we'll discuss how they formulated a possible plan for council and school board's consideration here. And with that, I'll turn it over to Casey.
Excellent. Thank you all. It's been a fun process to be a part of. Rose Schroeder, who is normally a part of my team, called in sick about 4:30 this morning. So she had to kind of bow out, but I'm excited to speak to you all tonight and engage you all in this discussion about the North Alley District. Just wanted to start with a quick overview of our project scope and kind of the background leading up to this project. Many of you may have been involved in discussions about this site over the years, both at the city level and at the school level. I know this is not necessarily a new conversation. There's been a lot of plans, talk about a new school in the past, as well as discussions about parking and concerns over infrastructure and circulation. So we acknowledge that this is not a new conversation, but we were tasked with kind of looking at how this site could function with a new school, also complement the needs of the community, the business district, the city. There's aging infrastructure back here. Pavement is at the end of its usable lifespan. Priorities may have changed over the years. So, the really purpose of this was to explore big picture ideas for improving circulation, continuing to, for this site to function with the school on it, but maybe improve some parking arrangements, add some public amenities. But really kind of dive into kind of a big picture look at this. Along the way, we also looked at traffic circulation as well as an inventory to the parking around here. So some of the challenges with the site, the first thing is finding kind of the balance between these different needs, the needs of the school district, the needs for public use, the needs of the business community, as well as the city services that are adjacent to it. We know that there's a lot of impacts on the site from a congestion standpoint, primarily at the peak AM and PM times during school drop off and pickup. The current site is situated in such a way that the front doors of the elementary school and the high school are near each other. And that's something that you're going to hear me refer to a few times during this presentation. But from a site planning standpoint, that was something that we saw as an opportunity to try to overcome and maybe distribute that circulation a little bit for that congestion. There's, again, the limited space here is at play, the ability to accommodate a new school while also reducing traffic congestion, providing new amenities while also trying to figure out what existing amenities stay or could be relocated is all part of, one of the challenges, that exist here. These challenges also present a number of opportunities. The first one that we heard a lot about during our process was about creating a safer pedestrian space. People want to be in this space. There's amenities here. There's ideas about new amenities, with the adjacency to your business district and the energy you have on Water Street. People want to be here and they want to be able to circulate and partake in amenities and then kind of filter into downtown and go to the different businesses that are there. There's an opportunity to share some of these spaces, right? Maybe parking, maybe some community amenities that both the school and the general public could both benefit from. By finding opportunities to do that, we can create maybe a little more space. A lot of discussion about the farmers market and creating permanent infrastructure and facilities to house the farmers market as well as other community events. And then reduce traffic congestion by potentially reorganizing the way vehicles use the site. If these changes also present opportunities for beautification, maybe some wayfinding and monumentation to kind of play into the city's branding efforts, as well as other amenities to improve just the identity of the district. So during this process, a key component of our scope was to listen to the many stakeholders affected by this plan. That was a significant part of our planning process. Our engagement plan included 4 different stakeholder meetings with city government, officials, school board, downtown betterment stakeholder group, the business owners. We also had a pop-up meeting at the farmers market, which functioned as an open house. Got a lot of great feedback there. We had steering committee meetings throughout the process. We had a community survey that we had up running for a couple months. I think we got just over 400 responses to that. And then we kind of finished up that engagement process with a community open house, where we kind of rolled out the findings of our work and presented that conceptual site plan. So I just want to summarize some of the feedback that we got through that process. When we were talking to the city officials and the various city services, consideration for existing amenities such as a recycling center, ball field, were part of that discussion. We also had a lot of discussion about improving the circulation into and out of the study area. You know, how can we make this more pedestrian friendly? What are we going to do with the vehicles that are using highway just to kind of cut through the site, while also trying to connect the school to downtown and other opportunities. We also talked about redoing the intersection at River and Highway. That is as an outsider coming to town, I think I nearly got killed at that intersection 3 times in one day. But that was one thing that we saw as immediate opportunity, regardless of what happens from a parking standpoint. If we can improve that intersection alone, this would be a lot of progress. So as part of that process too, we discussed emergency vehicle routes and response. That's something that's come up quite a bit in this discussion, thinking about how emergency vehicles use Highly, use Water Street or avoid Water Street to get where they're going. That's probably a continued conversation, and as part of the next steps of this, further consideration of those routes, as well as a larger traffic study, are probably warranted. We met with the school board stakeholder group. We talked about some pretty big moves. Things like closing off Goose Island Drive, removing Claiborne Drive as a through street. The idea of creating kind of this campus atmosphere between the elementary school and the high school came up a lot during the process. We talked about bus circulation and trying to limit the conflicts between buses and high school students, as well as parents during drop-off times. So finding a way to kind of separate these users and the different circulation means is going to be an important part of the planning process as it moves forward. We also talked about finding a new home for the tennis courts and some of the other amenities, while also trying to find an opportunity to keep kind of this recreation atmosphere here if we can, but maybe find some opportunities for shared amenities between the city and the school district. When we engaged the downtown businesses, we had a lot of discussion about parking, as you can imagine. Trying to make sure that we cater to the needs of the businesses and the patrons that use it. A lot of feedback about access to that parking and making sure that people, want to use this space and they want to come to this space and they want to feel comfortable parking in the North Alley area. And find more opportunities to spend time here. When people spend time in your downtown, they're more likely to spend money. So the more amenities that you can have to bring in different types of users, different types of patrons, the better for your downtown as a whole. We also discussed accessibility needs, ADA parking, and just efficient means of getting from a parking space to a business. Just want to touch on our community survey input. Again, I think we had somewhere around 407 responses to this, but just a few questions here that I want to touch on as it relates to kind of how community members use this space and how they want to use this space. But we have, what is your favorite component about Decorah? The small town feel is the most important thing here. And I think that speaks a lot to your community and really kind of relates to how people may use this. When you see something like this, you often think about, gathering spaces and a really active community. People want to be in your downtown and they appreciate that downtown feel. Parks and trails are important. The historic downtown is also very important. And then fourth on the list is the schools that you have here in town. When considering the study area, what types of uses would you like to see the most? The first thing that came up was recreational uses for the school or for the public, and then the school, the second one. So people are used to having the school here, right? They imagine that the elementary school will still be here. That's not anything surprising there. Civic gathering space places are important. And then fourth on the list was residential development. We asked a couple follow-up questions about residential development with kind of mixed reviews. I think if anything, some type of medium density housing is probably appropriate if there was opportunities for any type of redevelopment here. So, condos, townhomes, things like that, if you were going to develop a portion of it for residential. Please select the 3 priorities most important to you when considering the study area. Again, functionality for schools, right? How is the school going to function? Maybe what is the circulation? Beautification is the second important thing here. So how we can find ways to kind of dress up the area, make it more appealing, improve that identity. And then vehicular circulation and pedestrian circulation are in those top 4. Considering the site, which do you believe are the challenges? Select all that apply. So circulation and parking for school functions is certainly one of the challenges that was recognized by the community, also recognized by us. As we work through the different scenarios, trying to think about how you could reimagine the parking, integrate pedestrian amenities. It's a struggle, right? You have a very parking heavy area here in the North Alley district. So when you try to find opportunities to integrate different types of amenities, that's a challenge, just to try to keep the capacity that you have. Mix of uses, circulation and parking for business activities, and then non-motorized circulation. So that's your trails and making the site more bicycle and pedestrian friendly. Last couple here, what do you believe are the opportunities for the site? Select all that apply. Enhanced school circulation, more efficient arranged parking, active recreation, and a lot of the same here. And then the last question I want to touch on, please select 3 open space options you would like most to be at the project site. An outdoor amphitheater was top on the list. And I think this is something that had come up in previous conversations, previous planning studies. But the idea of having kind of that flexible space where you could have larger community events, you know, get a lot more people in here at one time, really fill up that parking area and, you know, have a really exciting opportunity for events. That's something that is high on the list. Community playground, again, that along with a splash pad and kind of an open plaza area, these things all kind of interrelate, right? It's the multi-generational aspect of kind of a park or open space. So you have amenities for all different ages of users. And then the last couple on here, food truck plaza, outdoor exercise stations, community garden. So as part of us kind of getting rolling into some concept development and some opportunities and identifying, you know, kind of what kind of the strengths and weaknesses of the district are. Prior to the farmers market, we had prepared a site analysis diagram as well as some really high level conceptual diagrams, which we then presented during that farmers market and started getting feedback. But one of the things that came up and we were starting to illustrate is that while the site is really here between kind of Day Spring Lane and Claiborne, we also think it's important to respect Water Street as a key part of this equation, right? A lot of what we heard is the reason that there's so much traffic on Hively is because nobody wants to drive down Water Street. I think that's probably true to a certain degree, but studying the traffic on Water Street is going to be important as it relates to this area, as well as the circulation that's coming into Claiborne and in and out on Hively. So all these things kind of relate together, but one of the things that we heard is the notion of potentially reevaluating your signals on Water Street, potentially changing those to a type of stop control, like a two-way stop or all-way stop. There's going to be a need for expanded detention on this site. We've heard that the site holds a lot of water here. It's really flat. There's a lot of areas that are somewhat depressed and hold water. Being right next to the river, you know, that makes a lot of sense, right? You have a lot of hardscape here as well. So as the site gets developed and you look at it, adding additional amenities, you're also going to need to find more capacity for that stormwater management. So one of the things that we looked at was how could you potentially expand your existing stormwater detention on the school site and just really kind of finding any opportunity to get some additional storage. We started looking at a few different concepts. Again, you're going to see a school site here that is a plan that was given to us by the school district. I don't know where you guys are in your planning process or site plan development, but this was just one plan that we had been given.
Okay, that's probably a good clarification. I thought you just traced the existing school, but
No,
we haven't engaged with an architect, so I highly doubt that the shape of the school will be like that.
right, yep, and that's probably good. We identify that it's very limiting just in the way it's organized.
Yeah, so I think so maybe if everybody could just remember that when they're looking at diagrams, that we haven't engaged any conversation with an architect on what our needs are. I think when we looked at it in the past, maybe we had a larger enrollment, so maybe that's even bigger, but I don't know if I recognize that.
Yeah, this is, I think we were given 2 or 3 plan alternatives, and this was the most recent one. So it's good to note that nothing's final here with any of this, let alone the shape of the school. But that's what we used is in terms of evaluating the site and kind of looking at how the site can function and where you could put the school on the site. So we developed just a few different scenarios that looked at a couple of main things. One, respecting the needs of the business community and the parking that exists. Also finding opportunities to integrate some green space or open space. And when I say green space, I'm referring to essentially anything pedestrian oriented. So this could be a pedestrian corridor. This could be a park-like space. It could be a combination of maybe some parking, some covered space. These are the areas that really cater to pedestrians and allow opportunities for open space amenities. So you'll see that in a few of these, we looked at kind of the different circulation needs, trying to separate parents at drop off time, trying to get parents to maybe circulate in and out of the site a little differently than they do today. Looking at high school circulation and how that could potentially change in this concept. We're actually closing off State Street, moving north, and actually thinking of this as like becoming kind of the service entrance or the main entrance to the high school. So kind of some, big things to wrap your head around, right? We looked at interrupting Hively Street with kind of a jog in the middle so that vehicular users maybe aren't so inclined to speed down Hively and try to get through the site as fast as they can. So you can see that over on the west end of the site, the alignment of Hively is a lot different than it is today as it meets River Street. Another alternative took the school and kind of flipped it to see how it could fit here. Obviously, just the layout of the school, the way it's oriented on the site, creates some pretty tight conflict points here on the north and south side. So here again, to that comment about the shape of the school, with a different shape, maybe this could work and fit in there a little better, as well as a reduction in the square footage of the school as well. Similar thought here for Hively, trying to kind of change the way it functions. We looked at kind of a different loop on what would be the east side of the school for parents to get in and drop off. One of the comments we heard here was parents get a little nervous in this setting sometimes. They don't like to get into a space that they can't just drop off and get out of effectively. So we took that into consideration moving forward, thinking about how parents could kind of continue to, stack along the street, potentially find some other spaces to park and walk their kids into the school. Maybe there's a walking school bus or something nearby where people could drop off and their kids could gather and get into the school. We didn't really kind of get into the intersection improvements here at Hively and River Street, but there was some discussions about potentially a roundabout in the future, some type of reimagined intersection. But we didn't study that in too much detail. That's going to need a more in-depth track analysis to really study those turning movements and the capacity and how that would relate to these surrounding land uses as well as the school. So in all of these, the assumption is that the existing elementary school is going to remain in place while the new elementary school is built, and then when the new school is built, the old elementary school will be removed. So that's why you see these plans pushing that school site over onto the kind of middle or western half of the site. So while we were engaging community members and stakeholders, we presented some imagery along the ways to try to kind of get people to wrap their heads around some of the ideas that we were talking about. We talked a lot about that market pavilion. We referenced a few different precedent projects where you could have some type of permanent structure for the farmers market as well as other events in the North Valley area. Here's a couple examples of what that could potentially look like. We discussed the notion of kind of pocket parks and pedestrian only streets potentially. There was discussion about that a little bit. I think a few people from the community tossed out the idea of closing down a block of Water Street and just making it only a pedestrian only space. Not sure how much traction that'll gain, but it's certainly an interesting idea. There's a lot of grade change that happens, right at the south side of your existing elementary school. So thinking about that less as a barrier, but more as an opportunity. You could build in some amphitheater style seating. You could kind of terrace that so that it's less of a drop off from Highway Street. And then thinking about how you can incorporate some seating areas and more pedestrian friendly opportunities into that larger open space. Here's some examples of kind of that terracing and those amphitheater style venues that could be built into that hillside. Ideas for integrating art into the streetscape. There's opportunities for potentially some monumentation or some gateways that would kind of welcome you into this space. Here's an example of kind of that medium density housing option that could be kind of built into the hillside if that was a popular move or got interest from any developers. So some of the things that we heard during that farmers market after we kind of roll out these concepts, that I highlighted just a few here, but replacing the traffic lights with maybe a yield or a stop sign along Water Street, the intersection improvements over there on the west end of the site. Talk about just kind of how the parking lot functions back here and the notion that the west end of the parking lot, the east end is typically full from the hotel and the pizza restaurant. So maybe trying to preserve more parking on that east end for those businesses that tend to have pretty steady patrons and need a lot more parking. There's also more parking spaces on the west end of the site as well. But from the business community perspective, a lot of discussion about parking and the understanding about the need for that parking and how it's a year-long need. There were some comments about how the parking for the school is for 9 months, and so maybe in that summertime when you do have a lot more people in town and it's busier, finding ways to kind of share parking amenities and let the public parking spill over to the school. Kind of flip through these a little quicker, but bike lanes came up, providing additional trail connections, the amphitheater and having some type of entertainment district in here came up quite a bit. The idea of a beer garden, back gathering spaces, a whole host of amenities. Some of the concerns, again, during this event, we heard about just stormwater needs, understanding the drainage concerns, potentially underlying issues where the school is proposed, just not knowing what might be uncovered when that construction starts. So from that, we then we took that feedback, started developing a few different concepts. We started looking at a few different arrangements, presented those to our steering committee, got some additional feedback, and then we developed what we refer to as the preferred concept. Please understand that this is by no means final concept. It's kind of the final deliverable of this planning process to lay out parking and circulation differently, and to incorporate pedestrian amenities, look at opportunities to change up the circulation between the elementary and the high school and provide more space for community activities. So a few notable things on this is Claiborne Drive and how we've changed that from a through street and kind of turn this into kind of that campus atmosphere between the elementary school and the high school. A lot of our discussion, we talked about separating those front doors. So that's what this concept identifies. Parents could drop off here at the front door of the elementary school, potentially stack some vehicles along Hively, potentially utilize some of the parking here with some dedicated pedestrian crossing areas to get to the front door of the elementary school. Buses would be circulated to the north side of the elementary school with a kind of dedicated drop-off zone that could allow buses to drop off kids for both the elementary school and the high school, but also continue to provide access to some what is currently on-street parking here and the two parking lots that are back here west of the high school. Continuing up State Street, we still kept a connection for Claiborne Drive heading east. There was a lot of, wouldn't say a lot, but there was several community members who talked about the concern of then encouraging a lot more traffic in this area of town to the streets east of here. One thing to think about with this notion is that if these two front doors are separated, you're kind of cutting that congestion by at least half. So all the vehicles that are currently here coming to the elementary school are now coming to here and kind of utilizing space over here. That may make Hively Street a little busier, but it's certainly reducing the amount of congestion that's happening here at State and Claiborne. We looked at parking very thoroughly here, kept the dedicated alley, one-way alley, that would be kind of your new Dayspring lane to serve the back of these businesses and the residents that live here. So there's a couple different points of ingress and egress to this one-way alley. And then we have 90-degree head-in parking in the parking area all throughout the North Alley area. We estimated that the off-street parking in this area is a reduction of about 40 spaces than what is currently there today. 20 of those spaces are in this area, and then the other 20 are west of this crossing here. So that's pretty good considering the amount of pedestrian amenities that we're adding here, creating a dedicated alley here, providing a dedicated sidewalk for this parking area, and then incorporating more green space and breaking up that parking significantly more than it is today. Hively Street is still proposed as a two-way street with parallel parking. So Hively Street would function similar to how it is now, but with a few different kind of dedicated enhanced pedestrian crossing areas to get people from the parking area into this community space. One of the concerns that we heard was about accommodating the ball field into the site. So looking at how we could potentially create a multi-use area here that would allow for a ball field potentially. You could have a backstop here. You could still have some type of amphitheater pavilion here so that when events are happening, you can kind of utilize the space. Maybe the fences, the sideline fence and outfield fence are removable or temporary. So there's, I think, a couple of different ways you could approach this, but still it provides ample space here for a variety of community activities. We showed 4 pickleball courts here. That was one of the activities that community members voiced their opinion for and their support for. So we wanted to show kind of how those could fit into the site. We know that the elementary school will likely have a playground dedicated to it. We included a second kind of larger playground that could be that communal space, that community playground, which could be used potentially by the school district or the school during the day, but also community members outside of school times. On the west end of the site here, we've cited what that market pavilion could be. During this kind of concept development stage, we looked at a few different areas. At one time, we kind of had it right in the middle of the site. But we moved it based on the concern for the impact of parking and making sure we preserve as much parking kind of in this end of the area as possible. So this pavilion fits in kind of the northwest corner of the North Alley area. Kind of an expanded pedestrian space around here. This could allow farmers market vendors to kind of back into this area for events and have a covered space, but a lot of different options for what that space could become. Now, these last diagrams just kind of break down the different types of circulation. So we wanted to make sure we illustrated what the public roads are, kind of what the school access looks like, where we're proposing kind of that one-way circulation versus two-way circulation. We kind of wanted to illustrate what the pedestrian accommodations are, with the understanding that, you know, these areas are significant pedestrian crossings. In all likelihood, there probably needs to be another one here, and then certainly one here at the revitalized intersection of River Street and Highway, depending on what that becomes. But the interesting thing about this is that there's a really strong access between the high school and the elementary school. This would allow really efficient circulation if the buses did drop off here for students to get from that bus drop off to the high school, but also to continue that circulation into Highway Street, North Alley, and downtown. Kind of paired up some of those public amenities with some example imagery. Pickleball courts, 2 images I highlighted earlier with the market pavilion and the kind of terracing idea, as well as potentially integrating a kind of community playground into this space. There's a lot of opportunities for wayfinding and monumentation throughout the district. So we've kind of highlighted some examples here of different scales and features that could be incorporated in here to enhance that identity and the branding efforts of the city. And the last slide here, just showing some examples of some stormwater management solutions, some green infrastructure that could be integrated into the site. So just last couple slides. Some feedback that we got during the final open house, general support for separating the front doors of the schools. I mean, people kind of gravitated towards that concept. We may have not hit it right on the head in terms of where that happens or what that orientation of the school is, but I think as the school site continues to be designed and developed, the notion of that is important. Mixed feelings about removing Claiborne as a through street. We kind of expected that. Certainly going to need a more in-depth traffic study to weigh that as an option, but kind of mixed feelings about kind of support for and against that idea. A lot of support for revitalized and reconstructed North Alley parking area as a whole, is from looking at the usage of it and understanding kind of where it is in the life cycle of that pavement and the infrastructure. You know, people understand that there's a need to replace it. Support for increasing the pedestrian accommodations along Highway and Day Spring Lane. A lot of support for more family-oriented community amenities here, and general concern about and questions about the new home of the ball field and the recycling center. We didn't get much feedback about the tennis courts, but certainly people wanted to know where the recycling center would be moved to in the future, if it's not here. We took a deep dive, kind of a high level dive into costs for amenities, understanding kind of the order of magnitude for public infrastructure improvements. And then broke that down by different areas. So we identified a cost of what it might take to replace Highway Street, make adjustments to the River Street intersection, the North Alley parking area as a whole at just shy of $6 million. We looked at minor modifications to the Goose Island intersection, Claiborne, and the idea of, getting rid of Claiborne and making it function as a bus drop off, and community open space. We included some pretty high level numbers here. These are really planning level budget estimates, just to kind of wrap your head around kind of the order of magnitude for these improvements as we've shown them today. So all in total, we're looking at, we estimated a budget of $17 million for all these things as shown. But really it should be probably looked at as a range. This includes a pretty considerable contingency here of about 25%, and then 20% of engineering and construction fees on top of that. So that's it for me. That was a lot, definitely more than the 45 minutes that I anticipated to talk. So, here for questions and to open up the conversation.
Casey, quick question while you have this slide up. So we've got Claiborne Drive to bus drop off, 870,000 roughly. I'm assuming that is new construct, like a full depth reconstruction to,
Yeah,
so full removal and replacement.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're kind of taking the limited information we have. We're working off aerials here. There's obviously no survey information. We did reach out to the Public Works Department and inquire about the age of the infrastructure. So we did look at your utilities in this area. Had a conversation with Jeremy about what utilities maybe needed to be replaced. So we tried to, these budgets and the spreadsheets that we use estimated kind of the big ticket items. And then we're kind of relying on that contingency to kind of pick up the rest of that kind of small intricacies that we just simply don't know at this level.
These numbers were based on this preferred concept.
Yeah.
Based off
Yeah,
that.
yeah, in terms of dimensions and in areas. Okay.
I have. Got rid of that.
No, go ahead.
Okay, wait a minute. I just had a question about the Claiborne, well, I have lots of questions, but one on the Claiborne, shutting down that street. Was there ever consideration of making an emergency vehicle only throughway through that green space there? And-
Yeah, that's something we talked to the staff about too, is that, there may be some flexibility in here to create a connection through here. You could have a kind of, you could keep it in a similar representation with some reinforced, like a reinforced turf, something like that. You could also create an access through here. Maybe it's a gate, maybe it's something that's, it's controlled on either side, but I think there's some opportunities there, potentially even surmountable curbs. But I think there's some flexibility to create that emergency access if this was the route you went.
Was there similar consideration given to letting buses through one way so you can save the turnaround?
Sure, yeah, I think it could function very similar.
The community space, community amenity space, where does that start and stop? Is that, for the playground and pickleball court?
Yeah.
With that.
So we kind of struck a line here. We kind of figured that this playground would be part of the elementary school site. But we tried to kind of include this whole area. So we got a number in there for sidewalk paving, we got the pickleball courts, this playground. I think the walls that are shown here are actually included in the Highway Street cost. It's knowing that if the street is replaced, these retaining walls along here would be replaced. So that kind of terracing could be built into the Hively Street project. But we plugged in there, I think, a pretty substantial number for some type of amphitheater pavilion, just as a placeholder, not knowing, what your expectations for that are, but yes, it includes all of this area.
And it's probably pretty obvious, but any space like that, we're talking about dual use between school during the day, city at night, or summer, whatever. Like pickleball courts could double as the hard surface playground area for the elementary on rainy days. As an example.
Yep.
Has there ever been consideration to, you don't want to add to that price tag, but, one of the city's great needs, of course, is this sort of long-term parking downtown, especially as we think about densifying housing downtown. To a deck parking or even a parking garage just on the corner of State, right behind the hotel there. So, and I don't even know, I'm gonna kind of roughly look up what that might cost, but the parking garage pan out in terms of, can a city essentially operate a parking garage? So if parking was free for people shopping, but if we really did have designated 40 spot parking garage, are they just so cost prohibitive that makes no sense? Or
I would say, I think that there is a right place for them. I think if you just built a standalone parking deck as it is, you're probably not gonna get as much value out of it. And that's gonna be it's a little harder to sell and buy. But I think if you could incorporate some housing above or businesses above and turn it into more of a multi-use scenario, where you have parking underneath, that becomes much more cost effective and realistic for a space like this.
If we're gonna be building new retaining walls there on north of Hively, what would it do to move that 20 foot to the north? And then take the drive-in angled parking instead of parallel? How much parking addition would that be?
So one of our kind of earlier concepts, we actually had parallel parking all along this side. And then we decided to look at kind of what our constraints are on the north side of Hively. We actually did push this a little further north than what we were originally looking at. I think with a accurate survey and really kind of getting into the dimensional needs of this, maybe you can really determine kind of what the impact is on this area, but we did push this a little further north, and that's why we wanted to include a pretty substantial cost for that retaining there. I think it would just have to be looked at a little further if you're going to try to get a little more space.
I know on your handout, you have the space, but you also talk about the phasing strategy. Because if you're looking at, how, where's this gonna go, where's this gonna go, but then you start getting into the details, and it takes more engineering and more expensive.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about the strategies that you have?
Well, I think, we talked a lot about next steps. What's that?
That was what I was referring to. I just.
Yeah, so a lot of talk about parking, right? The perception of parking in a downtown, this is always a difficult discussion because there's always a perception that you don't have enough parking. A real in-depth parking study of looking at peak usage times and if you're looking at your land use, looking at the impact of the new school, understanding how much parking the school needs as well as how much parking you need for these various land uses is going to be important. Looking at parking management and at what your existing management is for your parking as well as future. that can affect, that usage and that parking turnover. So that's an important step in the process, in our opinion, as well as the traffic study, kind of look at how people are getting into and out of the North Valley district, as well as your business district here. So that's gonna be important. Obviously, the conversation about Claiborne and the use here, if there's any, thought in pursuing this, that traffic study is gonna be important. But to go a step beyond that, really looking at your public infrastructure here, the age of your paving. I know Jeremy indicated that there's some pavement along here that would be great to keep because it's not that old. So we actually factor that into our thought process a little bit, and how you might be able to kind of build into that and salvage some of that to reduce some of the overall costs. But reconstructing highly is going to be important. Also thinking about how that impacts the school. If you got, depending on when the school gets built, and that's really going to impact what else you build where, and the timing of that. Just because two substantial projects happening at once, could create some additional conflict there. But yeah, I think that just takes some further investigating there.
There's currently some pretty heavy municipal infrastructure for stormwater under the space where the school would be going, as shown. How do you, in which budget do you accommodate the rerouting of utilities?
I don't think that we actually. I think
I mean, you got $6 million in the public green space. Is that 6 million including the diversion of stormwater utility?
I don't think I don't think it does. I think that, I'd have to remember, but I want to say that existing line is somewhere in here.
Right. I
And
mean,
then,
pretty much no matter how you look at the footprint of the school,
yeah.
if it's going on
gonna
that side, you're gonna be building on top of it.
be- Yeah,
So you have not, in any of these cost projections,
we did not look at kind of the space that's in here, removals of the ball field, that kind of parking area that's here. We did not look at costs for that. We kind of stuck really to the public right away, more or less. And then try to kind of find a space in here for defining kind of what this kind of community amenity space will be versus what the schools.
I was just thinking to the mayor's point, if we think about this in phasing, addressing where the water is gonna go, is an early phase piece. Because whether we redo Claiborne or not is a traffic study and eventually an infrastructure thing, but flip-flopping the land, saying, okay, yep, we want to build a school there, but knowing that you don't want to build on top of a major stormwater system is something we should discuss sooner than later, because that's going to be costly, and we need to address it early on in the process.
I think it is in there. Casey, I think you do, I do think you have about 1,000 feet of storm sewer when you're processing it. I don't recall if it's in the highway or the Claiborne. That should accommodate your routing. Around.
Because if that's built into the budget, then we know, and we can think about it as a staging thing, but to me, that's a first step. Other than
It's under highway.
Well, we do have a $90,000 line item in here of 450 linear feet of pipe. In that community space budget. So that must be that line that cuts across the site.
There's been some discussion about closing different streets, you know, Claiborne has been discussed and the original planning, there was the possibility of closing on State Street. Was it ever considered to extend Highway Street to the east and connect it up with South Avenue, one block of additional street that would potentially help out with circulation?
Down about here.
Yeah, that's correct.
I think it might have come up. I know there's a lot of talk about, you know, this parking area and kind of the future of it, and potentially considering this in the equation of parking needs, but, yeah, we didn't really explore it.
It's outside of this planning area, so that's probably wasn't brought up, but it's just something that it's one block of street that opens things up for broader circulation.
One question I get asked a lot, so we could just ask you and have it publicly known, I guess. I get asked a lot if in this plan was considered a tear down of the, so essentially a flipping of this back to the way it is, but rotating the school so the entrance is tightly again, not back at Claiborne. And what were the drawbacks of essentially rebuilding the school where it is, but taking up more space, right?
Our charge for this was to kind of proceed with the understanding that the school would be here, that the existing elementary school would stay while this school was being built, then it would be torn out. So I think that's a kind of a bigger question to the school district probably.
Yeah, he asked me, the big thing is, if we can leave the school up while we're building the new school, then we don't have to find places, because, you know, it's gonna take probably, I'll say 12, and then Ron will correct me and say 18 months. So,
18.
yeah. So just helps us displace. I think the other big advantage, like, you know, anytime, I mean, I didn't have to be here. Prior to this year, I wasn't here much when school was going on, but you never asked me to look at. You got the high school main entrance and the elementary main entrance, and they both, you know, you can almost, they look at each other, right? So I'm not an expert on traffic or anything, but I know if I had two schools that close, I would want to have entrances not be that close, which is just gonna help with traffic. So I see it as a long-term solution on just trying to get the front door to the elementary school as far away from the element or the high school. So not only rotate, but sliding over would be what if I were to get asked that question, or when I'm asked that question, that's kind of what I said.
And from a site planning standpoint for the school, you know, kind of three things that we look at, or kind of one thing that we look at that affects three is separating parents, buses, and high school drivers. So trying to keep those three separate so that they can each kind of function in their own space as much as possible is an important thing to think about from a site plan standpoint. Difficult to do in every scenario, and you know, even here, I think we got kind of that kind of shared thing happening here. But being able to kind of keep the elementary school front door and all the activity that's happening, you know, separate from the buses is really important.
Did you do a parking count of the current configuration compared to this? And I'm asked this question in consideration of parking that's available during non-school hours, but on an evening in May, when there are multiple activities going on at the high school, baseball games, softball games, dancers at John Klein. I'm just curious, the street parking spots now versus the way it is now.
Sure. So we only quantified the off-street parking in this area. And the difference there is a reduction of 40 spaces. We did not get into quantifying the on-street parking, but we tried to preserve it to the fullest extent possible. We tried to provide parallel parking along Highway Street still. I know that there's dedicated parallel parking on the east side of State Street. And then during drop off and pickup time, there's some unofficial parallel parking that happens along the west side. But in all reality, you know, if that's what that further, we could potentially accommodate that. We wanted to, there's angle parking up here currently. We changed that to head in 90-degree parking. So we kept parking there. We did, you know, we're showing on here some ideas about how you could add additional surface parking at the high school, if that's a need. But we did not get into quantifying the parking for the high school or the elementary school, just with the uncertainty about how many spaces, you know, they really need.
Cindy, we looked at the 2 additional proposed parking lots, the parking considered on Claiborne, and the existing stripage on Claiborne. And just considering that, it is a net increase in parking in that area.
One thing I think we have to take into account when considering the transportation picture generally. So if there's different scenarios in the morning and in the evening. And what we would have always, you know, wanted to do would be to separate the bus traffic from parent drop-off traffic. So there's really 4 different scenarios. If you look at bus traffic in the morning, you have a bus coming periodically and leaving and going somewhere else. If you look at the bus traffic in the afternoon, I said evening and that morning. In the afternoon, you have all these buses sitting at the same time, waiting for the kids to come out and get on the bus. So, with Jim's or maybe Rick, you probably have a better idea. In the afternoon, how many buses do we have staged there?
We have, at one time, there's flowing before the main dismissal, we typically have 5 out, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's our other special routes that fall in there ahead of that.
So the maximum would be 5 at any one time. Most likely.
Yeah.
So we can put that in a smaller area. You see the picture here drawn with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 buses. That doesn't happen. We don't need that much space for buses. At any time. In the morning, the buses are coming 1 by 1. In the afternoon, Adam at the high school, there's 2 or 3 of them. 2. So you can put 2 buses in the current parking, you know, Circle Drive at the high school. And actually 5 is accommodated by what we have right now. But the buses are separate from the kids. So they are being escorted by teachers to the buses. They get on the side where the bus door is, right side of the vehicle. And parent traffic would be lined up more in Claiborne as we have it now. And those cars could back up and back up and back up, starting at 2:30 or whenever the parents want to get there.
2:30.
Yeah. And there's a lot more space there. I wouldn't say plenty, but a lot more space there for them to do that. So I look at this and think, nope, we don't want the buses up there. We want them in that southwest corner. And we want to have the parent traffic up above. And in both circumstances, that would allow the passenger side door access for kids.
Well, I'm thinking too, being the mom of a 15-year-old. A year ago, I was driving through that back parking lot multiple times every day. And by having like a parent drive through to access the gym entrance in the back or the van door
Yeah.
on the side of the building.
So you were picking up and dropping off at the, for activity at the.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so seeing the buses parked in a spot where I imagine the parents of freshmen driving back, Yeah,
Let's see.
I would just correct, at the high school, at least in the afternoon, there are often 4 or 5 buses in front of the high school for a short period of time. But those buses are, they're not just our buses, they are Southwind buses, Earl buses. Now, in the morning, I'm not as familiar because I go in and I'm a bus driver and I go in and I drop off 2 kids in a hurry and I'm gone. But in the afternoon, there are often 4 or 5 buses lined up to drop off kids. Several of those buses have lifts for wheelchair kids and then those buses, a couple of those buses end up going over to John Klein as well after they're done at the high school. Obviously, this plan would converge all those buses at the one circle site. I'm guessing, although some of the kids that need the lift might need to be dropped off at the high school doors too.
That circle drive.
That's that.
Well, just look at this on that diagram, like the circle drive. Might still just be used for lift buses, even though that would put the buses in with the parent and staff traffic.
Do the other district buses typically leave earlier? They leave before the end of the school day?
That's not how that works. As far as I know, my bus is a special needs bus and my kids get out a little earlier. But it's still congested at the time because all the special needs buses from other districts are coming in at the same time at the high school and John Klein and then they converge on the middle school. But it's just kind of a dance of sorts. You just take the spot that you're given when you get to where you're supposed to be. And hopefully the bus in front of you gives you enough room to park or to pull in so you can drop your load. And mostly.
for being a bus driver.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of these,
Yeah, Kurt, thank you for being a bus driver.
Oh,
It's an important job.
It's a lot of fun. I would encourage everyone to do it.
it's a pretty bad bus driver. I'm hearing a lot of good concerns reflected in the comments that we're making, and I guess they reflect a lot of concerns I've heard out there from the community. I know a lot of you are in the same boat. I have substantive concerns and small concerns about the plan as presented, just like I think everyone around this table. And I have 2 unpopular things to say. I'm going to start by saying something I think will be more popular, and that is that I think it's really good we've gotten to this point in the process. I think for too long, we've asked the youngest, most vulnerable members of our community to bear an educational burden that's just unfair. We've known for more than 10 years that we needed to address this problem. And it's good that we're here, even if we don't necessarily see eye to eye on the best way to go about it. You know, and I hope we all come here willing to subsume some of our personal priorities and preferences to the absolute necessity that we should stop asking our children to pay the cost of our inability to coalesce around a shared plan. So I'm excited that we're here. And now here are the 2 unpopular things. When I look at this plan, I see so much concern and attention paid to where our cars will go. And I think that is an important question for the many people who need to drive a car, who live outside of town, who maybe are differently able. But I also think that it can go so far that the tail, can wag the dog a bit in this conversation. I look at all the provision for parking in this plan. And I look at North Alley when I drive by it on a random Thursday, just a few weeks before Christmas. And I always see empty spots. And I know that, before I got elected to council, I didn't pay attention to that. And I always thought Decorah has a parking problem. Decorah has a parking problem. But now what I know what it costs to have free parking spots available everywhere you might want to park very conveniently. I think that maybe Decorah has a parking management problem, maybe even a parking pricing problem. I didn't expect to be able to drive to school when I was 15. My mother would have laughed at me. Maybe that's an expectation that we need to look at.
I think that we unlock so much flexibility for being able to provide a better jewel for our community in its most valuable real estate that serves our children first, with mobility lanes, with bicycle lanes, with safe sidewalks and crossings. I think we should double down on those elements that are in this plan. Even if it costs us some parking, even if it means that sometimes there's a busy football game and a baseball game and the dancers. And we have to walk a few hundred feet farther to get to those amazing things. There are towns all over the Midwest that don't have any parking issues and don't have any traffic issues and don't have any congestion issues. And they have empty storefronts. Congestion and traffic and occasionally having to circle a parking lot are the symptoms of a healthy, vibrant, commercially successful town. And I personally would like to give our planners permission to do what, from my knowledge of city planners, a lot of them are itching to do, which is to stop designing their plans around cars and to start designing their plans around the people who arrive in the cars, even if it means they sometimes have to walk a bit farther. I know that's unpopular to say. I can't wait to see which quote from what I just said is going to be put up on the internet tomorrow. But I think
I'll be starting a Facebook page later.
that's fine. That's one thing. And the other thing, and I'm actually really going to not say anything much after this. These are the two comments I wanted to make. I think there's an embodied wisdom in the current location of the elementary school as far to the east side of the study area as possible because of the grading of the site. I think that is a natural enclave that separates uses, and I think that's nice. I don't think that we can do it with the current leave one up while we build the other one plan. And maybe we just can't deviate from that plan. But even then, I think it's wise to shift the school as far to the east as our traffic planning allows. And I'd like to see us consider that seriously as well, because the west end of this study area really is a public north-south, east-west connection point that makes sense because of the grading. It's a way that a lot of Water Street makes its way down to the river, to the city amenities and to the parking areas to the right and the left. So I personally, I think that school should be shaded as far east as possible. That's all I got.
One thing that I would say in response to that, I think talking about the east versus west, a lot of this goes back to just what I refer to as a historical accident. When the levee project was completed in the 1950s, all this land that had been a river became land. And if you look back historically, they just drew a line down the middle and said, that side belongs to the city. This side belongs to the school. So the elementary school and high school built over there because that's what was given to the school district. And everything else is, on the other side. It's like the Mason-Dixon line or something where, you own this, you own that, and never the two shall cross that line. But obviously that's no longer relevant.
Steve, when you say farthest east possible, like you're talking back up to abutting State Street?
I guess I don't know where the current elementary school, I'm so bad at thinking, and there's a reason he has his job and I don't. But I don't know where the current school is on this plan. Could you build to the east of it? I don't think so.
Right there.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess, I would say just to the west of it, right? I think that westernmost part of the study area is just such a naturally community-oriented place. And I feel like having a large modern elementary school there instead might rob us of some of those community gathering potentials.
And again, I would just state that I think it'd be fine to have it further east. We talked about that at different times in the past. The problem is during that construction period, you'd be essentially building a new school right up to the old school. And for any sort of recess or PE needs, they're gonna have to kind of wander through the construction site to get to the west side to play. That's a short-term concern, so it's not insurmountable, but that's one thing.
At least the last site plan that we had, and we have
25 different vendors with maybe possibly keeping a softball field to the east, probably to the west, when we're done. But the most recent one that we had, which we spent, I'm sure we've got $75,000 in different drawings we had for these different areas, but the most recent one we have, we do have the entrance to the school on the southeast side. We do have more parking, which did shift the school a little bit more towards the middle. The buses came in off of Highway Street and staged and came back off of Highway. And that also, we didn't close Claiborne, but we had a much better area for traffic to drop students off. Similar to where they are, but we improved that area quite a bit. And it did, like I said, it did move the school over a little bit to the west. But it needed us enough area there where we could do some staging and still build the school. So I would like, and if I don't know, to at least, and I'm not saying that this doesn't look good, there's a lot of good things about this, but I think that the plan that we had before, and I think maybe the school footprint would probably be smaller than we had before. It had a nice community, shared community gym, a little bit in the supersized gym area that we could use for both the school district and the city, but I think the plan that we had, is doing some of the things that we talked about here.
Just to visually explore a little bit about Steve's idea, is there any chance you could go back to the concept drawing that you had? It's about the fourth slide or so. You had talked about closing State Street, north of Highway Street.
So,
Maybe. That doesn't really show up. It's hard to see through the shading and so like that.
if this is the edge of the existing school.
Well, I was just thinking out loud, and I'm not going in any direction with this, but I mean, if you were to close State Street and consume that parking lot to the east of that. Well, I don't know that you're gonna pick up 1.5 acres of room space there.
Are you thinking? Sorry, I
I'm
was
not
gonna say,
thinking,
are you thinking close state, build a school essentially in that parking lot and where they're now stop at the old school site? So like-
no, I'm not thinking at all. I'm just, I'm visually looking to see whether or not it would fit. And so, yes, Emily, that is the, basically the area, if you were to look at that top left-hand corner of the brown shaded area there, and I'm trying to squint through the green to see about the footprint of where John Klein is there. Boy, there'd be an awful lot of excavation to take out that hillside road and re-level the spot, and so, no, I'm looking out loud, I guess.
Yeah.
Ryan, what were you were talking about putting the entrance to the school on the southeast corner, is that what you said in that?
Yeah. If there'd be a concern, that's also where the high school kids would be dropped off, unless, I don't think they would go back up to the high school, but they would, have to move over there, but it's not a big deal for the high school kids to have to go off to school after they get dropped off on a bus, but that segregates the buses from the parent drop off.
So you're talking up by the corner of Highway and State? That vicinity, that area?
For the parent drop off,
Right.
the parent drop off is gonna be fairly similar to where it is, but we would have more area where they can come in. And then egress can then come back out. There still would be some staging of the parents along Claiborne for the very time of the morning. But a lot of the cars would be taken off of that area and moved into more of a small roundabout area, not roundabout, but a U-shaped area that we get them off there.
We just pull up an aerial map of the area with, just like off of Google Maps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do that.
Oh, that top sheet is kind of.
Can I ask you
The
a
whole
question?
area.
the size of that, green field. That number says where there could be an outdoor amphitheater. Is that big enough for a softball field?
Yeah, I think we took 250 feet and laid it there, which is essentially what you have now from home plate to your outfield fence.
I mean, because in my mind, it's not ideal to have a softball field there, but it is a temporary, if it had to be a temporary move, it'll be found a location for a softball field, it would still have a location for it. I know of. It wouldn't be a, I mean, this whole project obviously might be stages, so maybe the stage is set the softball field for a little while until it gets located. 100,000 basin. And then the other thing, I just want to reflect on Steve's comment. And I don't disagree with all of it. But I think it's really important when we talk about school space and city space. When I look at school space, I think that is community city space. I mean, we sometimes think so much that our schools and our cities are separate, but I think we have to realize that they are about the Decorah community, both of those things. So I don't really see the school as separating community space from school space. To some degree, I think about it as a bridge to how we bring that together.
And I thought the plan Brian spoke to that had the community gym aspect to it was helping do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I agree. And so I like Steve's idea, we move to the east. I would like to see maybe, I think that plan, or there was one time where there was a playground sort of on the other side of the school too. So the school wasn't just parking on one side. And again, I don't know what that does to cars, and sometimes I don't care what it does to cars, and it's better for people too. But I can see what he's saying in terms of, you have your farmer's market here and a lot of activity, then you just have essentially surrounded by parking lots. I don't know if there's a way to do that as we think about moving the field. But I would definitely echo Steve's comment that we get hung up sometimes in where this bus is gonna sit and where this car is gonna sit. When ultimately what we really need to be thinking about is how do we get a school for our kids and create a space that people want to be in.
I'm not.
Steve said it more.
Hey, Brian, and the one you were looking at was it being built? You're still gonna be using John Klein when you were building it. And so it would end up more in the middle. The new school would be more in the middle than over to the.
Yeah, it'd be shifted over top
Yeah,
and not to be able to get the project done without
correct.
Was it a north-south or east-west oriented?
I'm sorry,
North-south or east-west oriented?
it would be east-west oriented.
I think essentially it's not really either, maybe southeast or southwest, northeast.
You have a picture of that, right?
I do.
What it looks like?
You would lose the connectivity, right, of these blocking towns, essentially connected downtown to the high school. You move it over too much. You have to jog around on it.
Well, I'm not too sure about the cost or how those sidewalks would get from the downtown down into the green space and things.
Mhm.
But I think, actually, this is a good thing.
I think an example in our community of a big change that changed parking and access was when Bentdale Commons was built at Luther. I don't know how many people can remember when you could drive through campus and Bentdale Commons wasn't there.
I used to deliver pizzas many years ago. I remember very well the old traffic pattern.
But the old traffic pattern was very convenient. But now, from a student standpoint, or from a gathering standpoint, or what that's used for, it's used pretty heavily. They have events and things like that, and they lost some parking. But they've been creative about promoting the library lot. Like park the library lot, you can walk, you can get to your event, or they're shuttling from the swimming pool or whatnot. I think educating about North Alley and wayfinding, and some public education about how it was it's a shift of numbers. can make this a positive experience. But change is hard, and I think we all realize that change is hard. But give people examples of positive change like that. And some people will be like, well, I delivered pizzas, I still like it better that way. You know, yeah.
Well, I like the ability where they got it set up to be able to enter into that peaceful campus. But also where it actually goes through right water. I like that.
Where they had the road in the middle.
No, they had. This is moved over this way.
We can't send it in. It's, I don't know, if you're on one of the big.
No, I'm looking,
Okay.
I'm looking at
The report.
is that you could adjust to make sure that you've got things in there, something else.
You know what slide you're on? But if
Well,
you can
this
pull
is,
it up.
this is the preferred concept with kids.
Oh,
I don't know where this is.
Yeah.
I think what he's pulling up was the one that Brian was talking about.
oh,
Wait, what are we planning?
what, Brian?
That's the one that Ryan was talking about.
The old, yeah.
All we have to do is just turn. it.
Yeah, but I'll turn
Yeah. While that's up, I'd like to go back to something in response, there we go, to what Steve from the fourth ward had commented on about the orientation. If managed to get this, is that gonna be able to get any bigger, Sean? Should I-
Yeah, I'm gonna try and save it.
Okay. Yeah, there we go. You talk about the orientation of the building, there essentially be two entrances. From, the way that we kind of contemplated it in some of the iterations, at least. And in this area, this is buses only and teachers. The teachers would park there, buses would come in, drop off there, and there's a secure door there where students get off buses, get on buses. And after 8:15 and, before 2:45, that's just a locked door. And the main entrance would effectively be over in this area. And this would be where parents come in. One idea was, they'll be able to stack or just in the morning, just come in, drop off, come down here and head back out into State Street and either north or south as they see fit. But dropping off here, this is essentially the main door, and that's where people would come during the day. This is secured, other than coming and going, this is the main entrance. So how you call that oriented? I don't know, but
And the advantage there, you're separating, the
Yeah.
drop off, obviously, and I'm gonna try to be funny here, it's easier for us to work with bus drivers, they're more trainable than parents. With teaching people,
I resemble that remark.
well.
the bus drivers are getting paid as
Well,
opposed.
Usually they're pretty excited if you say, hey, we got a way to get you out of the parent traffic, because one of the things that happens for bus drivers, is I gotta get, especially here, I've gotta get from John Klein over to the middle school, and so if it's really clogged up and I can't get my bus in, then that kind of ruins my day. So, yeah, you could have bus parking there on the west end. You could even imagine something with Hively where you could do bus drop off, I guess that would be south. Because the children will get off where the bus driver stops them and then they'll walk, we're not gonna make them walk through like a marsh or anything, they'll walk safely to school, but.
I only asked, wondering if Hively could be utilized more as one of those points of connection.
Yeah, but if you're directing all the bus traffic here, that's better than having all the parents down here, because there's, buses coming one at a time. Or maybe being, waiting 5 or 6 at a time, as opposed to, the scenario we have now with people parking all the way back to here.
One school would talk a little bit about the footprint as you originally had set out to have when we first started, compared to a need for the footprint that you have now, and the difference in what the estimate the total amount of students you really think about at that time. Compared to what it was.
That's interesting. We wanted to build a school for 50 years. You know, that's gonna be here 50 years and gonna take care of our needs. We don't want to underbuild it. But we were actually adding additional classrooms at that particular time for growth. And then we're just going out the opposite direction. So I would assume, you know, probably revise that footprint. You know, of course, we're all conceptually here in this. We did have number of rooms and some of it was 2 stories, some 1 story. We had our pre-K in first grade, I think, in the lower level.
And if I, like, I think I saw diagrams, this predated me, but like maybe we had got 8 sections. And now we're either a 4 or 5 section. But Brian, to Brian's point, you don't want to just be right there.
No, I understand.
And so, but they're clearly, it could be a smaller footprint.
I think it was contemplating 6 sections. Very well.
So it may make a difference as to whereabouts that we put that,
Right.
you know.
Thing too, and others correct me if I'm remembering wrong, but I believe this area over here, that the gymnasium was contemplating something more than a gymnasium and
We did.
a little closer to a recreation center.
Well,
So
that
I
was-
think a
It's on
regular
that
gym
side.
would not be that large.
I remember when we talked about that because of the, like, that whole area. And then having a gym on that side that could be helpful.
I have a question, is that still on the table? I mean, there is sort of a, when this design, the last design I remember, did have the sort of shared wellness space. I happened to be in Mount Vernon and saw the wellness center, of course, I'm very jealous and thinking about how do we create that shared space in the school and is that still a possibility, especially given sort of this redesign of trying to make this space very community driven? So I hope that, I guess I'm saying, I'm hoping that's still on the table.
I don't think we could build this building without having that gym being a shared
Yeah.
space, as we play in this space. We would want that to happen.
But I think what Emily is thinking of is different than what you are thinking. I think Emily is talking about a community rec center.
Well, no, I just know that in the old school building, like there was a room that could be used, could be divided into 4, right? And at any given time could be used during the whole district for different pull-out programs. But those dividers could be taken down and now you have a community room, right? I mean, so that there are these spaces within the school that could become community center-like, right?
We talked to that at one point in time, we even talked about a track, walking
Yeah.
down the top, and all the different things that can cost, you know, where we get big costs. We want the biggest bang for a buck. I think the community can use the gym, maybe supersize it, make it work. But yeah, we'd have to talk about that and try to figure out
Yeah.
what makes sense and what's too much and what's not enough.
I'll jump in and say, at a minimum, I think we want to have another competition level gym. You know, so like when we have events, it's quite as I've ever seen Mr. Riley, so that's great. When we have like events, the ability to have 2 gyms functioning for JV varsity kind of thing is something that, how many schools in our conference have that ability at?
Currently 2.
Currently 2. Okay. So,
Yeah, it's novel and I really kind of like it, but it's probably not great practice and at times, at least once in the last 2 years that I recall, we had boys basketball playing at the high school, girls basketball playing in here, and wrestling in the Gary Lee Gymnasium, which is, it's kind of cool and quaint. I like it because that was the, you know, the high school gym that my parents had and all that. But it's not really a great idea if we're regularly scheduling events there. Well, we can't spend too much time on what we do in the school, we do the thing, but the fact that we want to work together, I think is really what makes most sense.
Emily, one of the things I would say from my thought in the community use of that building, inviting the community in during school hours, I don't think is a very good idea.
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't think it's during those hours.
No.
I was thinking
Yeah.
outside of those hours.
And then, as Brian mentioned, you know, we'd have to take a look at, you know, what kind of spaces the school or the city would want to have. I remember there was a planning effort that Andy Nimrod was a part of, and they brought in a architect that looked at community center and that would be that had a lot of features to it. And I think that looking at what's realistic would be something that is possible, but the other part of it is that elementary kids don't change their shoes and they track in mud and dirt. And that's why the sport court surface over here is used in the elementary or in the Care Legion. But that's not a very good surface at all for a competition gym or even for old duffers like me that want to get out and shoot some baskets and so on like that. So I think it's not insurmountable, but those types of things need to be thought through.
In historic conversations, was it considered, like, yes, we know that we need a new school? Has it forever been, or maybe just assumed that this would be an elementary school? Or has it ever been considered, if we're looking at making a computer investment? One of the questions that has been asked from our community is, does this make more sense as a middle school? And I'm just curious if you've talked about that before.
Well, we have it language.
I know that questions come up, and I feel like that's something that, when we identify our space, that would be something I would walk through with the architect, to be honest with you. I can list some pros to that, I can list some cons to it. I'm an elementary person. And so there's a little bit of me that's like, oh, so then we're giving them a hand-me-down school. I'm not a big fan of that. But maybe there's some stuff that could be retrofitted. It just opens up a myriad of other possibilities. Having the middle, I can think of advantages to having the middle school next to the high school. One of which is that's kind of a natural thing. Gym space wise, maybe there's benefits there. Yeah, so again, our discussion here with the city, kind of like, what, we're all working on what we want. We need to identify simply where we could build a school at. Because I don't want to draw plans and then have you guys say, well, we're not really willing to trade that land or let you have that land. So it doesn't do me any good to work with an architect, or us any good to work with an architect and design a school on land we don't own. And I don't mean to be Captain Obvious, so we have to start there. But I think then it kind of gets to, then what are our priorities as a community? Joint priorities that are school board and city council and gym space and green space and what can we afford? And so I feel like it's a choose your own adventure once we get to that point, but I think we start with the space, list our priorities, and then maybe just kind of do some work on kind of those what ifs or if thens and what are the possibilities, because we talked about, well, should we put softball field there or should we relocate softball? I've heard that if softball's relocated, then it does free up some space. But the minute we publicly talk about where we want to relocate the softball field to, the person who may own the softball potential land, all of a sudden that becomes, very valuable. So I go back to Steve's point. I'm super glad we're having a discussion, and it creates a lot more questions than answers, I think. But to start with, we just need to know, as we start engaging with hopefully an architect, where we can build a school at.
Casey, can I ask a question on Casey, just about, more about back to the North Alley plan and the visioning thing. I support a downtown school. I think it's great. Obviously, we wouldn't have gone in on this had we not been supportive of it. I don't think it, maybe a couple of us are a little softer on it, but back to the numbers. Did your equations calculate the cost of the farmer's market structure in it at all? Or would that structure be over and above the North Alley reconstruct cost?
in there.
I believe that was in the public amenities line. It's not yeah, it's in the report itself.
You know, I'm gonna go back to what Dr. Cronin was just talking about a second ago. I sometimes wonder if we, I mean, all of us should bite off those small things first and find a softball place and find tennis space and solve that problem.
Haven't we been trying that for like 6 years? I mean, that's.
I know, but
That's-
I mean, really make a conscious effort to solve those problems, because then everything else works.
Maybe not go first, but you go hand in hand, because we have been trying to do
I
that.
know, but
But if you
if
want
we get those things taken care of,
Again, we've been doing that for 6 years.
But not with the mindset of getting it done.
Yeah, we have.
I think, you know, but you obviously need some sort of reassurance that in the end, this is gonna work.
That's why I
That's-
asked
you know,
the
that's what-
question about the softball field. That's why I asked, like, okay, so if this plan is this a temporary location for a softball field?
I think
I,
it's pretty clear that nobody wants to put a softball field here.
but
think
can we
that's-
do it until we find a spot, right? Why do we keep holding our kids hostage for a softball field? It is maddening.
I think the
one thing-
softball field is very important to a lot of people in our community, and I think it's important enough that it'll happen. I think it'll happen, and I think that our first priority should be to do the school, which we should have done 10 years ago. Dr. Cronin, I'm totally in agreement with you that we should not let the secondary considerations take precedence over the primary consideration. If you need insurance, that there's at least enough of us on the council to be okay with a reasonable arrangement where we're made whole, where we're able to serve our most vulnerable members of our community. I think that there's enough of us around these tables to make that happen. And I don't think it's very useful for our community for us to sit here and get into the little details where we're gonna inevitably, we're gonna find spots of conflict where Cindy and I just don't see eye to eye on something, and then we cross our hands and cross our arms and go away from the table. I'd rather see our staff here our clearly expressed priority that this needs to happen. I'd rather they understand what our priorities are in terms of parking and public amenities, and my desire that we definitely do find a good place for things like softball and court sports. But I feel like those decisions need to be made between staff, because I trust our staff to sit around the table with the school board staff and hammer out an arrangement for space sharing that works for our community. I don't want to go down the road that has been traveled so many times before, where we end up just butting heads and can't find a way out of this.
And maybe it's not butting heads, but maybe it's just complex
Yeah,
issues that the obvious answer isn't clear yet.
And is it fair to assume, I don't know that the school board knows that the council is in support of a downtown school? I mean, I think that we might internally in our head know that. I mean, I sit here and I'm like, I think you're right, when you say that, but I don't. You know, in my 3 years on council, we've talked about this one time before a pandemic. And so I think there might be a presumption, and maybe you need some more assurance in that.
Well, we don't wanna move forward and draw plans and start going to referendum. And then have people say, well, why are you building it? I mean, this plan looks like to me that's gonna take out the tennis courts. If it were this plan, then I guess the softball field, and we don't, as a school district, own all of that. So, yeah, we Travis and I had a polite discussion, not a long one, but just like, what would this even look like? And it would be some kind of memorandum of understanding that, you know, the school could proceed with plans. Understanding that we have to make things whole. I would just say, yeah, I'm sure if there was a perfect plan to this, the folks in Decorah would have come up with it 15 years ago. We're trying to just make sure we have a little give and take. So I don't want, I think Kirk makes a good point. If we, like, one of the things with the tennis courts is we've kind of been putting off. Not just with John Klein, some improvements, but we put off some stuff with the tennis courts that needs to be done. And before we spend money, resurfacing or something, should we just look at if there was a spot? And I don't know if we can find it, but that could be something, that could be on our priority list of, let's, start working on a tennis court spot.
I guess my point is to take care of the small things first. Because they're small.
Yeah.
And then and everything else can be done like this.
I absolutely understand. Yeah, I absolutely understand that perspective. And I think in kind of response to both of the comments, I feel like we have fallback options. If nothing can get done, or for an intermediate time, we could have softball being played in where the current John Klein sits. If that's not a location that people are happy with long-term, then we keep looking for somewhere else. I mean, many years ago, we were playing softball in the middle of the stock car track for M6. I think that we could get by on the John Klein playground for however long it took. And with regard to tennis, whereas it's just not practical to build an elementary school out there. I think I know there's plenty of room to build tennis courts out there, which is not ideal because we're taking away green space from the students here. But if that's what it takes to free up, move the chess piece down there, I think most of us would say, yeah.
What's happening at West Side? Is West Side an option for transports?
Yeah, I mean, that when this, to be clear, with this new facility, West Side becomes obsolete to us. We would no longer be using it. So whether it be a daycare center or whether it be low income housing or whether it be recreational facilities. I can't speak for anybody else, but I'd say, give us a buck, it's yours.
Slow down.
It's currently used for Head Start. Currently, right?
Yeah,
But it would move into that.
yeah.
We will not have a use for that space when this building is built. And.
Parking garage. That's a joke.
Yeah. So, one thing not to regress a little bit, if we look at this, the estimate of the community amenity space. That's a big area, that green space, whether it's that plan or the plan that the folks showed us it's gonna be expensive to rehab that and make it something. So I would think it's either gonna have to be probably either a permanent field that also accommodates baseball or softball, I'm not too sure which one, or I don't think a temporary fix is gonna cost too much to make it a temporary fix.
Well, my notion of a temporary fix would be it's grass, maybe there's a cutout infield and Park and Rec softball can get by on that without having permanent dugouts and everything else.
We can't find a solution for it now. A temporary solution is gonna help us further down the road. I don't know if we're not gonna make the ground for a tennis or a softball field. I think we probably need to try to satisfy that need, find a spot for it, or else maybe give it from it as I think folks have, but we have been kicking that one around a long time, Kirk, and I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you, but it's been a troublesome situation. At one time, we were 2 weeks away from owning the Dalen property and buying that property and putting softball fields out there.
I guess one thing we really haven't discussed tonight, maybe you probably don't want to get into it, Frank, but I saw a cost figure up there on the screen that he put up just for the North Valley project of $17 million, which doesn't even include the school. So we're looking at, that's 800,000 gorilla that sits in the room right now.
Yeah.
You add a school into that, you're looking at 30 million plus probably. Are we gonna get a bond issue passed for something like that? I don't know.
So,
One comment that I wanted to fit into in response to Emily, kind of like, why is this not going further before? I think from school board perspective, we've always been afraid of being presumptuous in talking about, what we want to do before people have agreed, to say, yeah, the city's going to sell us this land and I'm going to go buy this land for, we've been afraid of stepping on toes. We've been just kind of reserved and just biding our time until things magically aligned and the stars shine down on us. But I guess just speaking for myself, 10 years is long enough to him and haw around this. It's time to get something done. And that's why now it's like, okay, that's what we wanted to meet and, talk about it. Okay, so concrete steps, what do we do?
Excellent.
Yeah, so
So, as we kind of work through, like, I guess it'd probably help if we establish, priorities. For each group, and I think, kind of like some of us heard at lunch today, I think some of those circles will be very similar. And we hope that they are, that, field space and gym space, but, so that then we could, if we are gonna work on an MOU kind of thing, so that we can move forward, what kind of things do you guys, what does the city council want to see, and then, school board, what do we want to see that way? Because in my mind, we just kind of make a list, and whether we do some of that now, or you guys want to work on it individually, or you want to talk through, I mean, I think we talked about softball fields and tennis courts, and, there's a little part of that where it's like, who owns it, who pays for it, and then, we're not gonna arm wrestle, but we'll figure out something to. We yeah. Right, stick with that. Bike rigs. Motorcycle? No.
No, and to Tim's point, I do think, there is value in, so Kirk talked about. Going after the little stuff, let's knock off, where are the tennis courts going to go? Where are these things going to go? If they're not in here, where are they gonna go as a separate conversation, then hey, a ball field needs to be in here. So, I believe it's to Stephen's point of trusting staff to work towards development of this site with council's opinions being voiced. Need you to voice them so that myself that can work on where are the tennis courts going to go, working with Dr. Cronin on potential solutions here or offsite. What are those other potential solutions? But if there are anything that council sees in here and says that must be in here, then I need to know that so that I'm not working, trying to chase an alternative location of tennis courts. And lo and behold, council wants them there the whole time. So if you see components like that, please let me know.
No. When I propose this idea to take care of the small things first, I don't mean necessarily that we need to build a softball field and have it all ready to go. I'm just saying we just need the space for it. We can build it later because we're gonna have to concentrate our financial efforts on this. And I'm saying that I would say the same thing about tennis courts, because we have other tennis courts in the community that could possibly be shared for a time. But how long, the high school is going to want their own competitive tennis courts.
Sure. And, yeah, I don't think we're saying build it. I think we're just saying identify, like, we're gonna take that off the plate and say the future site of Decorah softball fields. Future site of tennis courts. And some of that might be like Ron alluded to, we could just say, we're gonna put tennis courts here, and that becomes check.
Well, and if we can agree on the land. And we can say the ingress egress for the elementary school is going to be on Highway, or the egress is going to be on Claiborne. Then that allows us to stage our infrastructure work and street work for the other half of North Alley. If we don't touch half of North Alley, because half of it was done in the Water Street project, and we only touch the other half. And we do things in smaller stages. I think that could be a path for us as well. So it's important that we agree on the space, the rec part, but then we can work on safe routes to school and the infrastructure and replacement of highway, because Ivy and the other side of North Alley are really just well past structural integrity.
Well, for me, big picture, when I compare what had just been on the previous round of planning, that seemed to be a lot more space devoted to the school's use. What was up from someone's cell phone, from Brian's cell phone, I think. One thing I think that makes this plan a stronger one is that there's actually still a fair amount of explicitly civic space in the plan. And I think it's important to preserve that at the heart of our city, even if it means the school can't check everyone on its list of wants. And so, Travis, you asked for where I'm at. I have opinions about where things should be, but something that I am going to insist on in the final plan is that we not give that whole internal green area over to school parking, turnaround, drop off, playground, and so forth. I think that needs to retain a civic gathering space character. With, for me, a priority on civic spaces that will be heavily used Tuesday at 3 p.m. and not simply when there happens to be a huge concert that we want to have 1,000 people at. I feel like the band shell is always one of those things that looks really nice in the renditions and the plans and the public meetings. But when I go to communities with band shells, they're almost always empty. And I just want to make sure that we scale this appropriately and not create a place that feels sterile or a place that looks better in Photoshop than it feels when you're walking across it. So I know that was a lot to say, that school, yeah, but then there's got to be some civic spaces, and I'm less concerned that the parking and wayfinding for drop-offs be super convenient if it comes at the expense of civic space.
It sounds like perhaps that it would be good to have staff, city staff and school staff, take what we discussed tonight and to digest it, work with it. But also in the meantime, for council, we need to give Travis input on what we're discussing. So at least we have maybe a basis for moving. I guess.
Yeah, I think one thing that would be really helpful for tonight on Facebook is really so much work has been done, right? I mean, there have been so many spaces looked at, so many thoughts put into this. And I feel like sometimes it gets revisited, right? So I believe Dan Belringer wants to ask about closing State Street and moving the school over to this parking lot. And there were reasons listed as to why that doesn't work, right? And I asked the question tonight about why not tear down John Klein and build right where it is, because I get asked that all the time, but that's also been looked at, right? I know there's looks about like, there's just a certain amount of like, when I go home tonight, I'm gonna get calls and emails about, have you looked at this? Have you looked at that? Have you looked at that? Have you looked at that? And I would love one place where we had information where we could send to people that said, here's what we looked at, and here's why it doesn't work, or here's what we're thinking, or I think one, it'll help pass on issue. Two, it'll help kind of that whole like negativity that always happens in Decorah whenever there's a new idea, like, let's just go with, keep rehashing things. I don't know, I mean, the idea that we've already looked at playboard being closed and that didn't pass 20 years ago, we did the high school, all these things. It would just be nice if we had one place that people could go to get the like, what have we done and why are we here?
To that point, we had a presentation to council 10 years ago.
Maybe not quite, but possible.
But yeah, 8 to 10 years ago, that was essentially laying forth the history of why John Klein is not worth rehabilitating.
Mm-hmm.
B, why a new school should be built. And C, why it should be built there. So I think, that would be a great starting point for all that, because it kind of did all that history, but
It was a good presentation, and two of us were shareholders before we ran for council. So,
Maybe one of us ran first.
I mean, we get it. But it's communicating it back to our constituents.
yeah.
And just to build on Emily's point, having an opportunity to collect
And that's, that like frequently asked questions or whatever you want to call it. Document would be absolutely part of our bond referendum potential. So that task is ultimately going to fall to the district, all of the district slash architecture to help us design and pass, because they're gonna say, hey, you know, if somebody says close State Street and build farther east, why that doesn't work. Or does.
I mean, I do think it behooves it before the referendum, only because every design you throw out there, people are gonna just keep asking us.
Tim, what is the school district's bonding capacity?
Last time we looked, from memory, I'm kind of looking at Kathy a little bit, I think we're in the 25 to $30 million range. Does that sound about right, Kathy? And that's bonding, that's geo bonding capacity. There's also a capacity, anticipated revenue bond that would be, the board could do that, borrow against future sake and Bethel. But you want to.
That's a lesser amount. So what I remember, the school was in the vicinity of $20 million when we were looking at the plan Brian had, that we flagged up on the board there. And to Karsten's point that we had a $17 million figure right there. So likely there's gonna have to be some phasing that goes in. You're talking about the storm sewer and so on like that. Certainly that's the case. And I can, you know, think back to the cost of Water Street was $3 million in 1995. The cost of putting the water and sewer up Highway 9 going to the business park was roughly $3 million. Yeah, so, and that's kind of seems like a big project for the city, kind of, we're not looking at $17 million of contribution from the city, and the school isn't gonna be able to cover paving all the streets and so on like that have been proposed in this whole area there. So that is gonna be a Travis and Tim conversation about who pays for what, when it gets paid for. That's the thing that you have to really keep in mind. I think we all do that. You know, we've got several million that of dollars that would be put into a project that would be beyond what the school is, but it would be hard to take on all of the infrastructure and amenities and other things that are there, I would think anyway.
Oh, I don't think anybody's.
Ultimately, it's the taxpayer that's gonna have to pick up the stand for the whole.
Yeah, well, yeah. But it makes sense, it would almost make sense that if we're bond for the whole thing, if you could, if your voters can dream that big. Because then you can just get it done appropriately without phasing it in and redoing things and. But I mean, everything from Hively to Claiborne has to be probably be done all at once just to accommodate the school and drainage and the play area and everything else. I don't know, I mean, North Valley maybe can be done a little bit later, but it appears to me that you will not want to do almost all of it as much as you could at one time.
And then the intersection and the safe routes, I mean, if you look at the beginning of the dock, you had, what, $1 million worth of potential grant opportunity that were based on carbon reduction and more walking, right? It was basically friendlier transit.
There's a few different funding sources targeting traffic safety improvements.
Right. But if we focus on the triangle at the recycling center and the farmer's market area right there, and if that is your focus of public space, And then we consciously say, okay, we want the school to the west. And our primary walkthrough is the hotel. Or the hotel or Bank of the West. And we've been planning our cut throughs there. Then we can stage things pretty easily and fix the points.
One thing I would think if Claiborne is to remain open, that reduces a lot of work for the reconstruction of that to the pedestrian features that are currently in the over main presentation.
There are cheaper and more expensive ways of closing off roads. I mean, I mean that if we end up needing to phase this in, which I kind of assume that we will. We certainly have demonstrated on Fifth Avenue, for instance, that we can accomplish a lot in terms of traffic flow control without much expensive curb and gutter work. That said, I don't think, again, this is a place where the community, certainly, that's one of those tension points. Claiborne Drive, open or closed. I don't think we should settle that before we can all agree that this is the place for our children to have a new school. And I just want to start there.
Yeah, I could not have said that better, and I appreciate that comment, because I think we can get hung up on so many of these little things. And it's like, it's hard for me to comment on the streets till I saw a traffic study, right? It's hard to comment on, and all of these things, but who wants to do a traffic study, and we don't even know that, but this is even.
You also, as the city of Decorah, you do not need a 60% plus constituent vote to close the street. And we need a bond to pass.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's part of the reason why I think it might, just from a logistical standpoint or pragmatics, like maybe we do the school part, first and then move from there. I don't know. We're getting in the weeds again. So I think we've had some good conversation.
I think Ross is a really good point. I mean, there is no, there has to be a benefit to the city in order for us to figure this out, right? So focusing on that corner, that unbelievably horrific intersection where, we gotta fix that. So that already is a starting point for, let's focus right there. As opposed to these things that I think are no-win right now.
But I think it's important to identify the no-win so we can prioritize correctly. So it's time well spent in the weeds.
And the process is certainly worthwhile.
So between Tim and Travis. What, you agree with as far as the staff executive? Do you want to at least to get started?
So to get started,
It's like,
keep in mind it's a work session of the council, so there's no
Right.
votes, nobody votes in second or anything, but I have not heard a single objection to at least a consideration of the school in the area. So I'm summarizing what I'm taking away as staff to work on. No objection to a school in the area. With not necessarily constructing or implementing some of those changes, whether it's tennis courts or the recycling roll-off dumpsters, where they're gonna go, or at least identifying and somewhat securing those other alternatives. And getting those done in correlation with the school moving forward. Is that an accurate summation?
Yes. How about we put the recycling dumpsters at West Side and we get that for $1?
Take the building.
let's
Yeah.
go.
Okay, so move on.
Yeah,
No, just the way it is.
So they'd be right next to the.
That's why I mean, it's.
The county's dumpsters, I think we can fund this over, but that's probably not.
And they're down.
I don't know if it's, relevant or not, but used to be a lot of football games like that, big enough for that. Maybe you could actually.
I think just progress it a little bit, man.
head towards a happy, thing, but, you know, think how great it's been for the tennis courts to be where they are. For our middle school, or for our kids, not middle school, but our youngest ages, to be able to use those for hard surface. And I think even look at the pickleball court, there, and that making that an area that's good for the community, the pickleball court plus its kids who still need a hard surface. Be able to continue that would make sense, and something like that coming out of here, I think makes a lot of sense.
Why are those only pickleball and not the whole, they don't fit, and why not the court's right there?
I think there was more interest in pickleball.
Right.
Let's, has Luther been contacting, I mean, we talked to them about possibly doing a joint thing with tennis courts, or is that at all?
I just had a conversation with Renee Arnold this morning. To reaffirm that question, because I think it had to come up.
Right.
Her president Warren actually talked about it last week, and they're welcoming, and we've had numerous discussions with them, and they're welcoming a revisitation of it.
Okay, good.
I knew he wouldn't be able to just say. We, yeah, that's one of the things we look at, and I don't want to put too much on Luther,
Right,
but, you know,
they're not.
like, hey, the whole plan is contingent on that, but absolutely, I mean, we've quietly started asking different stuff, but now it can kind of be like, hey, you know, we need, like, yeah, if we could find 3 different spots for the tennis courts, that would be a discussion of, discussion point that we can come back with. Obviously, like I said earlier, we don't want to identify a spot that we would then have to pay double the price for. But as a default, we kind of identified that, if nowhere else, we could probably move the tennis courts here. There'd be some pluses and minuses, but that doesn't mean that's for sure, because there might be some other spots that also might be really well, but just kind of. Well, Travis and I start having discussions, it sounds like we can start working on those things of tennis courts and ball fields.
I want to,
This is Ben Lang. Could I say something from Zoom?
Yeah, well, I suppose.
Just, thank you. I'm a tennis player. And if there is not a plan for those 6 tennis courts to have a spot, that constituency is lost, and we need that for the bond issue. And I'm also a former softball and baseball coach, and we need a plan for the softball field. So we do need to get those little details done ahead of time so that we have a plan for those before we go forward, or we're not going to get a bond issue for the elementary.
Not to avoid the obvious too, we have very successful boys and girls tennis programs that require 6 courts for competition, and we're not going to cancel tennis.
Yeah.
well, we gotta work. Cut out. You know, I want to thank Casey and his team for the work that they brought forth. I want to thank both the council and the school board for getting together and for also being willing to work as a one, all together to carry the project.
I think Laura, there was one.
So, wait for the next. And that.
I'm sure we'll be back again at some point.
All right, do we need to adjourn? We do our work session.
And we.
Oh, they just take all, okay. We've handled our work.